childhood entertainment. Let's talk about it. Hello guys, welcome back to another Let's Talk About It. On today's episode, I wanted to talk about the subject of things we did for entertainment as children. So, the first example of childhood entertainment is something that we all did on a hot summer's day with your friends, your family in the garden, and that was having a water fight. Now, having a water fight was probably some of the most fun I ever had as a kid. I just absolutely love it. You know, when you're younger, you'd be in the garden with your cousins or your siblings or your neighbours, whoever it might be. You'd have the paddling pool out, you might be kicking a football around, hanging out under a tree, whatever. And then somebody, in my experience, usually a grandparent, would have the fantastic idea of getting the water pistols out. Now, as a much younger child, it would often be those neon coloured pistols, which you'd take the little plug out the end, dunk it in water, fill it up, and you'd spray each other with water. Yeah, loads of fun with that. Really great time as a kid. Now then, inevitably, as I got older, the weapons you would want for your water fights would have to be bigger and better than they were before. And so, as I'm sure is the case for you guys as well, the weapon of choice would be the Super Soaker, which was, and I'm sure still is, an amazing water pistol. They were fantastic. Now, they were big and they were bright. They could hold a lot of water. I had the very basic one, I believe, which was kind of like a yellow gun with a green bottle on top for the water. Pump action. They'd shoot for miles. You'd have a brilliant time with them, just having a water fight. And this could go on for ages in your garden, just running around, getting soaking wet. But sometimes something magical would happen. The weather would be perfect, you'd be with the right people, and your guardians would allow you to go outside and have a water fight in the streets. And it was more often than not epic. You'd have kids from multiple houses, from multiple streets would come to join in. You'd be there with your Super Soakers, your water pistols, your water cannons. People would be throwing water bombs. You'd have sponges being thrown, hoses going. The streets would be absolutely soaking wet. You'd be soaking wet. Everyone would be soaking wet, and you were having a brilliant time. And then you'd have kids at either end of the spectrum here. You'd have the kid that would, unfortunately, I guess, didn't have a working water pistol, didn't have water balloons or anything like that. So they would be limited to having a saucepan of water to pour over your head or throw at somebody. The water, not the saucepan. Then you have the kids which you aspired to be at that time in your life. And that was the kid who had the biggest Super Soaker on the market at the time. And that often came with having a backpack. So they'd be there with a plastic backpack full of water, hose to the gun. It could shoot further, it could shoot harder, it held more water, and they would just be an absolute machine. They were the Terminator of water fights. Being out with your mates, having fun, having a water fight is some of the best memories I've got from being a kid. Okay, the next example I have for you is something that I really enjoyed doing as a kid, and that was painting Warhammer models. So Warhammer is a tabletop strategy game where basically you build your own armies, and these armies were small figurines that you would paint. I can remember going into a Games Workshop for the first time as a kid and being blown away by it. In the middle of the shop there was a big tabletop with a battle terrain on it. It was like grass with mountains and a forest, rivers, broken down vehicles, maybe blood splatter, just these really epic scenes. And around the table there'd be kids in a horseshoe, and they'd be watching people battle with their collection of models. And they'd be rolling dice and laying things down, and I was just blown away by it. I thought it was really, really cool. And then you had the kits that were for sale. So you have various size boxes, and you could buy Space Marines or wizards or dragons, tanks, a variety of things to build your army. And so I got my first kit as a child. It was, I think, a Space Marines one, a very basic one, had maybe 6 in there. And they had swords, and they had big shoulder pads, and you got a paint kit. And I went home and I painted them. Was the painting very good? No. Did I enjoy myself? Yes. Is that the important thing? Yes. And there was a magazine that came out, I think maybe monthly, called White Dwarf. And I used to read that magazine cover to cover, really enjoyed it. And then one day I got the magazine and the name had changed from White Dwarf to White Orc. Because this is when Warhammer brought out a series called Gorka Morka. And Gorka Morka was basically orcs had come and taken over the Warhammer world. And that obviously came with a new selection of models to paint. And so I went all in on it. I had tanks, I had vehicles, I had obviously my soldiers. You could buy extras like barbed wire fencing, blockades, to really create this apocalyptic kind of world. I loved the idea of it, I loved the look of the characters, and I also loved the fact that because of the theme of it, you could paint them however you wanted. I would paint things like, give them war paint, mud splattered on them. You could have the armor could be different colors. It wouldn't really matter because it was all part of this really like grungy, gritty, like hardcore orc army. And I thought it was fantastic. So the last piece of childhood entertainment I'd like to speak about is video rental shops. So of course you had your local video rental shops, often fairly dingy places, and that's fine, but it never made it much fun going into these stores. Then you had something very different to those types of local rental shops. You had Blockbusters. Blockbusters for me as a kid was an amazing place. You had the big chunky yellow lettering above the door, you had that bold blue, you had the merchandise, you had posters up. It was a store that really drew you in, and you'd go inside and there'd be shelf after shelf of all the movies and TV shows that you could want to watch. And you'd go to these sections, and most of the time I would find a movie I wanted to watch fairly quickly, but then I would sweep, for as long as it took, the entire store, looking at every single movie on the shelf, often ones I shouldn't be looking at, but hey ho. And you'd move around, and then I'd end up back where I started with the original videotape that I picked. But sometimes you wanted to watch the new release, and so you'd go straight to the new release section, and it would be empty. You got there too late in the day, they'd all been rented out. And what we have to remember is there was a time before Netflix, before Sky, before any of that kind of stuff, where if a shop only had 50 copies of a certain movie and 50 copies were rented out before you got there, that was it. You'd have to wait till next week. And if you're lucky, you'd get a drink, maybe some sweets, a snack, and you'd hold on to these items for dear life because they were very, very valuable to you as a kid. And then of course you'd approach the desk, your parent would pull out the iconic Blockbusters rental card, rent the film, you take it home. And then over the course of a weekend, you would watch this film as many times as you could because you wanted to get as much out of it as you could, given that you were on a time restraint, which again isn't something we have to think about in this day and age when it comes to digital entertainment. I can pause Netflix, I can pause Amazon Prime, I can come back to these things. But back then, when you're renting, and also a TV in general, wasn't an option. You either watched it when you had it or you didn't. Well guys, that brings me to the end of another video. If you have any comments for me, please let me know below. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.